OBS, for whatever reason, changed my microphone to be the webcam, not the microphone that's a couple inches from my face. So I recorded like 2.5 hours of tutorial I'm about to edit down, and I'm realizing it all sounds like crap.
Well, it's not great, but that's what you're in for. I think I figured out how to get the sound card to come back. I have to dial the USB knob, which for some reason controls Spotify on my desktop, and once I stop that, everything seems to be working okay. Although I still think I should be getting better sound out of this microphone. Hopefully, my audio will be better in the future. Yeah. Updating Premiere, I think they have AI audio cleanup tools, although I've updated both Premiere and After Effects in the past day, and neither of them will open post-update. We'll try restarting. And even after a reboot, it still crashes. We'll just get into it.
Okay, we're back. What are we doing today? So I actually just finished a video about quitting Adobe and kind of what I'm doing instead, but the vibes were not. I was a little bit kind of grumpy, I think. So I wanted to do one that was more like, hey, let's make something, instead of me just being a grump. So I've spent the last month making a bunch of shots for this montage. I filmed a bunch of things without a total plan, really. I was kind of just, it was raining, it was freezing, we kind of got what we got, and I was like, I'll kind of figure it out in the edit. And it's coming together pretty good. Again, I think you've already seen a lot of this, but a lot of stuff like this where I'm kind of like reprojecting the footage onto an environment and doing extensions and trying to blend everything all together. I've been working on this whole kind of crazy Christmas parade, which is fun, and again, trying to blend this with this foreground element that we got. Honestly, the hard part about that is we just didn't have enough light, and so I can't push things particularly far because I just don't have the data from the original footage. So I'm having to kind of match the whole scene into this footage more so than usually I'd kind of like bring them both close together. But I thought today maybe we could work on this shot. They're going around collecting cans, and then at the end they find this big reservoir of cans, basically, which turns into a nice payday when they dump it into kind of a cash for coins type recycle bin thing. So let's just jump into that. The first thing I'm going to do is try to quickly linearize this footage in Resolve, and there could be a better way to do this. But first I'm going to move it above the adjustment layer to an active track, hit I and O to set the in and out points. I'm going to go into the color tab here. I'm going to right click, reset the node grade to make sure it's the raw thing, and I'm going to drag in the color space transform node in here, which will let me change it from my camera settings. And I'll make a video explaining all this in detail, although most of this probably makes sense. I'm putting in my camera settings right now for my color profile, and for the output, I'm using the settings I want to export the EXRs at, which is what Blender likes, which is sRGB linear. And this is where I haven't made a video really getting into it yet because I'm still not sure my workflow is great. Like, there's something about, since I have this really bright saturated bag, once you combine the color gamut with the linearization, these values in the EXR end up being exceptionally bright in a way I don't know if it's mathematically accurate. So normally I'd say turn the tone mapping off. That's just messing with the map. But in this case, I might just change the custom output to, you know, something like 200 that hopefully will kind of keep a cap on the yellow values being too bright. Anyways, that bit's probably not even too relevant to most of you, but let's go into the export tab. I'm going to save it to dumping cans, EXR half DWAA, so there's a little compression that keeps the file size way smaller without really any noticeable quality loss. Add to render, go! Now we're in Blender. Let's go into motion tracking. Let's load in our image sequence from dumping cans. I'm going to sort by name, select the first one, select everything. Sometimes it doesn't select all of them for the image sequence, so I've just started doing that, sorting them by name first so I can be sure to select the first one first. Probably just superstition at this point, but open clip, set scene frames, which matches it to the length of the sequence, and it looks like we've got everything in here. I'm going to go to the middle, I'm going to increase the pattern size a little bit, and focusing mostly on the foreground, I'm going to control click on little points of contrast here. There isn't really any camera movement in this at all. Like, I'm basically standing perfectly static, so I shouldn't even really be able to get a track from this, except for the fact that there's always a little bit of human wiggle, and we have enough resolution here that I'm hoping I can get a little something, just because it's going to help me match everything up and rebuild the scene. So I'm really focusing on just clicking on these foreground areas here. Let's go into the Solve tab here. Going to put in my camera settings, which in this case are already the default for Blender, which is really great. I usually have a 24mm focal lens when I'm out shooting, and 35mm sensor is what my camera has. So I can hit A, select everything, and let's track backwards. Then we're going to go back to that frame, track forwards. And what I'm going to look at here is, like, do I actually wiggle at all? Like, I'm going to zoom in and see, is there any parallax shift? Because all I want is that little bit of wiggle. And I think this might be hard, but, like, between frame 10, I'm looking right here, between frame 10 and, like, frame 50, maybe there's a difference. I don't know. I literally don't see any difference, but let's try solving it, see what we get. Solve error, 0.19. That's pretty good. That's a very, very little bit of a pixel thing. All right, I'm going to go back into layout. I'm going to create a camera and give it the same settings as our tracked camera, which is 24mm and 35mm sensor. And under the constraints, I'm going to give it the camera solver, which will bring over the solution we just got from the motion tracking. Under overlay, I'm going to check motion tracking, which will bring in little dots here. And it looks like it could be, like, here's that little wall, here's the ground, and as long as I kind of get this so it's as flat as possible, I think that'll probably work. And this just goes to show, you know, the kind of counterintuitive thing where if you're doing a 3D track, it actually helps quite a bit to have a lot of 3D motion, so you get that really clear parallax offsetting for reconstruction. Sometimes if I'm really on the ball, I'll actually move the camera in 3D space before or after the take, just so that I can extend the track and make sure that I can really get that parallax involved in the track. Then I'll just cut that bit out of the shot in the edit. But yeah, this should be enough for us to play with. Let's try to kind of map it out to some sort of scale, because right now we're huge. This is about the size of a person here, so I'm going to scale this whole thing way, way down until it kind of makes camera's very small, so I'm going to select it, and under the camera settings in viewport display, I'm going to turn the size up to, yeah, nice and big. Okay, well, it'd be more fun to work on this shot if there actually were a little bit more 3D camera motion, but sometimes this is what you have to work with, so let's just kind of keep going. I'm going to try to reconstruct this scene just a little bit right now. Just eyeballing it first, trying to line it up with some of these dots. Save. Dumping cans. And to help with the reconstruction, I'm going to turn the background image on. Let's add our movie clip back in. There we go. And I'm going to put it into the front with a low visibility here. So hopefully I can just kind of line this up and extrude it. I want to straighten this out, so I might shift right click on this point right here to set the 3D cursor, and then go to the camera view. Actually, let's go to wireframe so we can see these edges. And if I change the transform point to the 3D cursor, I can rotate around that point until these two lines here kind of line up a little bit better. And then that means this one's off, so here I might try to just kind of dial it in. I'm going to rotate on this axis now. And now it looks like everything's kind of squared up. Yeah. And the last thing I'm going to do is basically just put a plane in the background here that the footage can project onto. And if this doesn't make sense, it will in a minute. I'm creating geometry I can project the footage onto, which means I don't really care about, you know, what's going on with the bush here or anything. I just really want to keep this concrete area and them right here. I'm going to give it a new material, and I'm going to open up the shader editor here. There we go. And Control T, I'm going to load in that same image sequence. Dumping cans, yes. And I'm going to plug it into an emission shader here. And if we look at what we're doing right now, it probably looks kind of nuts because we've just been extruding stuff and it doesn't know how to map it. I'm going to use Nathan's projection node, which I'll link to below. We've got it up on the GitHub. It's great. It basically just lets you project right from the camera's view with a lot easier than using the camera project modifier, which usually necessitates you adding a whole bunch of geometry and other stuff. This one just kind of works. If you select the camera, go down to New Camera Project Node. Now if we go back into our material here, it's created a group which I can plug into instead of the texture coordinates right into there. And you can see, look at that. It's just projected exactly the way the camera sees it. If we rotate the camera around, I know I was just talking about this recently. But it tiles, which creates this zone of infinite confusion. So instead of that, let's change it from repeat to clip, which clips everything else black. But if we add a transparent shader here, mix those together and use the alpha channel of the footage as the mix factor, we can see the footage and everything else is mixing in a transparent shader which is kind of nice. Okay, and we can work with this. Last thing I want to do, you can see it's set to linear, but, and this is another big problem with my workflow, this should be working. This should be linearized footage. We linearized it already in Resolve. If anybody has any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. But right now, just changing it to sRGB seems to kind of properly linearize it. It does look a little bit weird because it's just high contrast, but I think this is actually more or less correct. And if we go under color management and change it to like medium low contrast or just low contrast, that works fine. And again, I can fix it all in the grade anyways. And I still have my overlay going in the camera, so I'm gonna uncheck to turn that off. For the sky world here, I'm going to select the color, and I'm going to hold down Alt and just click and drag around here on the sky, which will kind of average out all of these values, which means now the whole world has a sky value of about the same in the footage, which means if I add a little like cube right here, it should, I mean, it looks a little bright right now, but if we darken it up to something kind of gray, it kind of feels like it belongs in the scene a little bit. And because our footage is linearized and these yellow values should be pretty bright, it should be casting a little bit of light back onto the cube. Because I clamped it in Resolve, remember in the tone mapper, it's not really bright. In fact, I might re-export it again without as much of a clamp, because otherwise this yellow bag would actually be casting a proper amount of light into this the 3D scene. But I could also just add a little point light where I want it and do the same thing. I'm loving this little alt drag kind of trick. It's so easy for just matching up digital lights to the real lights, but we'll do that later. First, I want to try to kind of model in a little room for them to be in. So let's create a cube here that's kind of lining up with that. This whole scene kind of takes place in the nooks and crannies and underneaths and kind of behind areas, just to show that, like, you know, they're not part of like the main world basically. And this is part of it, which means I've been adding like lots of fake roofs onto different shots, stuff like this, just to make it feel like, you know, you're really under the pier. Or I enhanced this overhang a little bit, or like added this this little bit of framing kind of stuff. It's a lot of living underneath. So I'm doing the exact same thing here. I'm just extruding out some sort of room, and this is maybe a little bit too basic, but we can refine it as we go. I also get to decide what do I want to do with the background here. A lot of this stuff I'm not particularly mad at. The distant hills are so Pacific Northwest. The low glacier carved, you know, tops of old mountains covered in distinctive Douglas fir silhouette type skyline. It's just so Puget Sound. And so I've been going in and trying to turn these into city silhouettes, which we might do here today if we can figure out how to mask these guys out really easily. I want to try to, right off the bat, match this lighting. Just make sure we're working with a good, strong, solid foundation. And it always helps when you're shooting in like kind of a natural light deal, that you're shooting towards the light source, in general, you know. And so I might darken up this area here and maybe even like add, you know, a little wall. And once we darken up this material, yeah, that's feeling pretty good. What else should we do? I think I want to add a floor type thing right here that lines up with, if I can use this original crack. Oh, that would be nice if that actually all kind of lined up perfectly. It also doesn't really matter. Like, I can just cheat it like that and it'll always be fine. This is just for one shot. You have to worry more about stuff like this when you're using the same thing for a lot of different angles that have to match from, you know, a lot of different times. In this case, we don't even have perspective shift from the camera, so if it looks good right now, it'll work the whole time. So this will be good. I always like those angled areas under stairs. That's such an audacious kind of like thing to just have cutting through a room. So I might add one of those right there, kind of going like that, and we can have some vending machines right here, casting a tiny little bit of additional light. Okay, we'll grab this, we'll grab that, and that. Pull it out, which means we want to pull this bit right here out too to make room for it. Pull this up. Let's do that stair thing. Control R, add an edge loop. Pull this like, let's see, how does it look? And I still have this big hole in the floor right here, so if I click on this, and it's hard to see actually, you can't see the wireframe because this footage is in the way, so I might bring these points in a little bit more so that they're not blocking my view. We don't need them anyways. Cool. And that way it's easier to work down here. So if I do that, I can just pull that over, pull these guys back. Cool, and now the room is nice and dark. And that's feeling okay. It might be a little bit kind of short. Here, I might just take all of these upper ceiling parts, raise them up just a little bit. Yeah, okay. Let's try modeling some of the can dumping thing. And this is where I don't totally know how it's going to work, because they've got this bag here that they're dumping in. But then they're dumping it into this bag, which I was going to turn into the garbage can, basically. But I don't think I can really easily mask. I guess I could roto, but we'll see if maybe we can design the garbage collector bin to kind of hide any of those overlaps anyways. Again, this is one of those days where my friends were being really good sports, but we were just filming out in the rain in the first weekend in January, and everybody was very cold and wet, and I was just kind of trying to be like, I'll fix it in post. As long as we get something we can work with, that's great. So here, let's create a cube. And I'm going to, yeah, you can see right here, even this reflection is bright enough that it's kind of casting back onto the, I think that's fine. Gonna model.
And this is Ian from the edit speaking, just to give you a torturous reminder of what halfway decent audio sounds like. And again, a lot of times people say, hey, just upload the video unedited. You don't have to edit it. And I'm like, yeah, but this is what it's like if I don't edit it. It's just me looking at a cube in silence. You don't want this. Nobody wants this. And if you do want it, I don't know.
Okay, so again, I'm trying to design this so that it blocks conveniently as much stuff as I want, so I don't have to do paint out work. So ideally, it would be down here blocking these legs, but they're not dumping it until up here. So I could design it so it's something kind of like that. Actually, that doesn't feel too weird, and there can be like a little, you know, card charger register kind of thing right there. I'm gonna have the same device kind of 3 times, so just to block it in, I'll probably customize each one, but I want to see what it looks like, so I'll do that. And that means we actually don't need this wall to be this far back. We could move it all closer. Maybe we keep the wall back there, but instead, let's duplicate this and extrude it out. We'll kind of make like a back framing piece too. They can go all the way down to the floor here and all the way up to here. And maybe we can bring that out. And if we, here, let's start giving these materials too. I'm going to do one that's trim. I'm going to do one that's base. And I'm going to do one that's yellow. And this one will be emissive, and if we select this, maybe this one, inset them a little bit, and here, we'll just assign that to yellow right now. We can make that be the color yellow that we want. And again, this is a luxury you get to do when it's a passion project. I don't have to, I'm not working with concept art that somebody else designed. I'm not working with a cinematographer. I'm not, I can decide to design things to make my own life as easy as possible. So like right here, there's this bit of extra yellow light hitting her legs and like down here. I think if I just decide, well, maybe this machine just has this cool inset yellow glowing strip on it, maybe that can both cast that yellow light there and onto the legs, and that just helps with the overall integration. It does feel a little bit weird because it does feel like it's coming out from underneath, and there's a few things I can do about that. So first off, I could just add a corrector node and correct this one small part and kind of like decrease the saturation and the brightness of this little bit and re-export that and have it in the scene. But in this case, I might just do it inside of Blender. I just want to darken this whole foreground area here as if it's like further recessed into the nook. And to do that, I'm going to first create an empty where I want that transition to be. I'm going to select the footage, and I'm going to mix the colors here, color, mix color, have the footage go into both, but on one of them, I'm going to have an RGB curve that's way darker, and here we'll go all the way to that second one. And if we get dark enough here, you see it doesn't really change the nature of the light, it's just darker, and we can toggle between those two, which I'm going to control with a gradient texture here. I'm going to make it a quadratic, and if I hit Control T, I can have it use the location of an object here, and we can just select what object that is. In this case, it's going to be this empty we already created. If I drag this gradient down into the mix factor, this gradient now controls where the shadow is of the whole thing, so I can scale it up. Maybe I'll put it at a bit of a diagonal. If you're ever trying to get two things to blend, hiding everything in darkness is never a bad way to go. Like for right here, if I create another little plane kind of hovering here, you can see the ground is dark, but now this machine feels maybe too bright. I could put this piece here. Let's give it kind of a dark material too. And I'm going to make this invisible to the camera under the object settings. Visibility, turn off camera. So it's casting a shadow on this geometry, but it isn't actually visible to the camera. And that way we kind of, you can't see the seam. It's all just dark. Don't worry about it. Here, I might shrink it down and kind of split the difference of that a little bit. Another thing we could do is we could just have this ground right here come over, yeah. And as long as we end up matching these materials in any way close, that could be pretty forgiving. Or something I do an embarrassing amount. Here, let's, if we put a railing in the foreground here, look at that. We've added depth and layers to our image while also hiding exactly any problem areas that we might have. And I might even darken up. This is actually when I should start to try to add materials to this space. So so let's just do it. Here, let's go back into the, oh, come on, into the shader editor. And I think I'm going to have it match this material I already kind of established right here. In fact, maybe I'll just copy and paste all this in, open up a new Blender, as if that's kind of just the look of the boardwalk. I like these lights. I went and I added another little layer of dead bugs inside, which I think adds quite a bit. So yeah, select all of these guys, copy, paste them into the other Blender. Where are they? There they are. Oh, they're very tiny. That's because I didn't really have a good 3D track for the other shot either, so, you know, who cares? But we'll call this plaster, and we'll give that material to this other object. We'll grab our little light here. We can just delete this now. We got the material from it. We can stick this against the back wall if we want. We should probably fix these bugs so they're all clumped along the bottom, but haha, that'll just be a thing we don't do. To get the plaster to work, here, let's tab into edit mode, hit A to select everything in U, cube projection, and whoa, that looks suddenly very weird and flat. Let's go into the UV editor and maybe just scale everything up a little bit. Just start moving it and see if we find anything that we kind of like. And sometimes just the material doesn't work for the shape. Like this one isn't lending itself particularly easily to any happy accidents, but maybe we can find something that kind of works. I think this back wall works okay. Which means I just want this stuff to match it a little bit better. I want to have like some of this dark grime in there. I think that's going to help. Like that. And this triangle, let's get that to be a nice dark area too. And if we move that here, we get sort of that match dark area, which means if we hit Shift G, select coplanar, we get everything. Oh, I guess we'll do that by hand. We'll get this bit. If I move this, I can get some of that dark stuff lined up there too. So now everything kind of blends okay. Here, I'll get some of that gap back right underneath. Yeah, okay, that feels pretty good. And now it might be premature, but I might start beveling some of these corners a little bit as if they're not just perfect 90-degree angles. Yeah, and that always adds so much. Look at that. That feels a lot more tangible now. Although we do have that seam, but I'll put a wire there. We won't even see it. It'll be great. This light might be brightening up this corner a little bit more than I want. Here, let's go into the shader editor here, and I'm just going to go under emission strength and set it to something dim. In fact, this whole area is just a lot brighter than I would have expected. I mean, I guess we do have really big emissive planes here. Next, let's try to tackle the ground, and this will be interesting because this isn't just a color. This is very much how it interacts with the light. It's basically a rough mirror. And so let's select all of this stuff and give it a new material. We'll call it wet ground. And I'm going to try to assign it to that. I'm going to try to find something that just matches this. Like, we could probably even just dial it in by eyeballing this, trying to match that, and turning down the roughness a little bit so everything kind of lined up. Well, here, let's use an image texture. I'm going to open, yeah, asphalt damage. Let's see how that goes. We'll go into the UV editor and scale it up so it's a little bit denser here. Then let's also plug this texture into the normal map through a bump map here into the height. Turn the distance down like 0.02. And now the pixel values are actually kind of trying to create a bump map, which mostly just manifests as a little bit of roughness in the reflection. Instead of tweaking like this roughness here, we can do it by actually changing the bump map. So like right here, it's totally glossy. And we'll just roughen this a bit. And I'm going to go through an RGB curves here and bring this top bit down until these values kind of match these ones here. Dialing this in, I think this is way more reflective than this one, especially because we have that gradient going on right here. But let's go in and turn down our IOR level. I want to pull these points over a little bit to square off this. Can I just get rid of that edge? Yeah, because I want to turn each one of these into kind of their own separate little paving thing. Actually, maybe I'll just select all of these 4 faces, hit Alt-E, extrude individual faces, up just a tiny little bit, go into individual origins, scale each one down, and then Control-B to kind of bevel it out like that. And that looks okay. I think I want to get rid of this ground right here. X delete faces. And I think what I'm going to do instead is I still have this gradient controlling the transition between the brightness and the darkness here. I might move it this way. I think it's a little bit much, so I might turn this back up to like right here. And if I create that plane like we did earlier, kind of just hovering over this cement that's not visible to the camera, we can have our own little shadow on just the geometry too that tries to kind of match that stuff together. And what's interesting about this technique is, okay, so the closer we get it to the surface, the sharper that shadow is going to be. So to keep it as soft as I want, here, let's straighten this out a little bit here. Yeah, I think that's going to work good. To get it as soft as I want it to be pretty high, but that means it's not necessarily making things as bright or dark as I want. So instead of giving it just a default material, let's give it a transparent material here, shader transparent. And now it won't give any shadow, but if we change the color of the transparent, we can change the color of the shadow coming out of it until it matches pretty good. The other hard thing is that this is a really vertical scene. Like if this were just some random incidental angular scene, it would blend a lot easier. And so I think there's a few things I could kind of do about this. First, I'm going to turn down this roughness just a little bit, and I'm just going to put some gunk on that scene. I've got, oh, I made this as an asset, but I never actually released it. It's just all my old street scans and stuff. But over here, I've got some old pine needles I got, and I can just paste those into the scene, hopefully. Which is pretty good here. Maybe pull it back. It kind of implies it's a step, so I could actually get away with like raising all of this up a tad. And if I select it in the shader editor, I can darken it up a little bit. Just anything to keep it from looking too obvious. I just don't want people to notice it, really. As long as we have it here, we can stick it in other corners and stuff too. Ooh, especially in that corner, that adds quite a bit. So now I'm feeling like this cement here is kind of a little bit too bright. So here, let's darken that up. It's a dusk scene, so again, it's like let the focus be whatever. I'll let the light define where I want people looking, and everything else, I'm just going to err on the side of it being a little bit too dark. And it seems like the darker I make it, the more believable everything's feeling. Let's try taking this light right here and just sticking it up outside of the doorway. And I want to put it in a place where it kind of helps break up this straight line is really what I'm trying to do. And taking a little step back, if we look at his coat, like his coat is specular enough that it is giving you a lot of lighting information, like subconsciously, and his hair is wet, so you can see it's making it look like there's light right above him, and he's obviously underneath an overhang, which when you kind of scrub through this, you can feel it a little bit. Like it doesn't feel like he's actually in an alcove, which probably means maybe I'll just get rid of this whole area right here. Let's do that. And we'll just try to pull these bits up so that they're in line with the stairs there. These lights up a little bit too. Or maybe bring them inside the space a little bit. And instead of having them greenish, we could just make them, here, let's see, we can delete all of this and make the color be a little bit of this same blue. Turn the saturation way down. I've been enjoying really controlled kind of color schemes of like, all right, yeah, this shot will just be yellow and blue, and he's got this one little, she's got her red hat, he's got the one same color of red like on his coat. just keeping it really tight, and it means I can really control where the focus is of the shot. It's been nice. And let's turn on the depth of field. I'm gonna make the f-stop really small so I can see where I'm focusing. I want to focus more or less right on this last machine, kind of like that. But that means since they're in the distance, they're out of focus. So I'm going to create a little plane here just to bring kind of right here so that they're more in focus in here. I'll bring this as close as I can too, which all kind of feels weird. But again, once I go back into the camera settings and change this to like an f-stop of 2 or even like there, this is a little fuzzy, but this works. Now, why do we have this edge here though? We shouldn't have this edge. My guess is it's the gradient here. It's just interacting with the footage. So if we pull it this way a little bit, yeah, that's going to disappear. And let's see what we can do with this whole area right here. So the fun thing about having this whole setup where the texture just projected onto the geometry is if I duplicate this, hit P, separate by selection, going to right click, set the origin to the geometry so it's right in the middle. Wherever I put this is going to be footage. So if I bring it to the foreground here, oh, and again, if we get too far in the foreground, this gradient starts to mess with it. So let's just shrink the gradient a little bit, sharpen up that edge. Because what I want to do is just stick this right in here, so it kind of looks like it's intersecting with the garbage can like that. In fact, here, let's look at the original footage here. It's basically hanging from her hand the whole time, but her hand does have some wiggle to it. And I haven't messed with some of this stuff in a while, so we'll see how well this works. But if we go back into motion tracking here, we're going to create a new object. I'm going to call this one her hand. And here, we'll go to frame 1 right here. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to go to where the ring is intersecting like that light shadow band on her finger. Just right there, maybe scale it down. And I can track forwards. Yeah, can goes right in front of that finger, but that's okay. I'll just go a couple frames later and not worry about it. Reposition it on there. Keep tracking. Cool. And then under solve, under geometry, I can say link empty to track. You can see it adds a new empty here, which from the camera's point of view, although right now I think it's clipped out here. If I change the clip distance, yeah, we can see this lines up with her finger in relation to the track we already have going, which is kind of fun. At least it should. Here, let's see. Yeah, that seems to be working really well. The problem, of course, is that it doesn't know, it's just one point, and so it doesn't know how far from the camera it is. But I think we can actually solve that with the constraint that's been automatically applied to that tracker, the depth object. Okay, object used to define depth in camera space by projecting on the surface of this object. So I'm going to create a cube in the background here where I want her hand to be in 3D space, and under the constraints for this tracker, if I say use that object, now I think there it is. It's very small. I'm going to scale it up so we can actually see it, but now it's in the correct place in kind of 3D space and 2D space. I can hide this cube here. Let's just create M new collection hidden, where we'll put all the stuff we want but we don't want to see, and now I can parent this piece of geometry here to her hand. Yes, maybe line up this geometry with that empty a little bit, but now it should work. It should just move around with the hand in the right way. Go in with the knife tool and maybe make it just a little bit funkier. Here, delete those faces. I'm going to grab all of these points and hit Control-Shift-B to bevel them out, smooth out the whole thing. And now here, let's select the garbage bin. Let's try to add the hole for the cans to go in. Extrude, delete faces. Let's select this, select coplanar, expand that selection, and let's apply the trim to this one here, which we're just going to have the metallic and a little rough, and we'll dial that in later. Although it looks like metallic has been applied to everything else because it was the first tech. Okay, well, I'll worry about all that later. So obviously this little bit is a little bit underwhelming, but you can see it is attached to the motion of her hand now, which is great. Let's try tracking his hand too. Here, let's add another object. It'll be his hand. And actually, after looking at it, I don't think there's a place to track his hand really that would do any help. There's no way this motion really correlates with the rest of the flopping bag. His hand is flopping all over the place. So let's just get a little bit more hackish. I'm going to create a new plane right here, rotate it 90 degrees, kind of stick it in that same relative area, use that same material so it'll look like the bag, and I could try to kind of hand animate this plane so that it feels like it's controlling where the bag is flopping on top of that display. Or I could enhance the design of the machine here. Let's create a plane right here, 90 degrees, this up, and I can put a little arrow that goes like, put in garbage right here, and it'll just look like it's part of the design thing. Again, this is actually will help the final design of the thing, because this is what I design without thinking about it. This is like, yeah, we'll extrude, it's all made of boxes and stuff, but once necessity forces you to have to start actually doing stuff, it starts to actually feel a little bit engineered. And so I'm not mad at having to do this process, even if it does feel, again, a little bit cheap. Here, Control-Shift-B, smooth these out a little bit. Linked faces, extrude them out. We can bevel this seam a little bit if we want to. Right-click, shade smooth by angle. And I think everything is now currently a little metallic. So let's assign some of this stuff to the base. Here, Shift-G, coplanar. Yeah, and I'll assign that to base, which could be, what color should that be? Maybe that'll be our accent color. Yeah, I mean, green works. That's the color of recycling, I suppose. But I can still see the seam real good. So let's just keep enhancing our design here. I'm going to create a, well, we'll do this with mesh, actually. I'm going to create a plane, and I'm basically going to model the curve with regular geometry, because that's what I'm more familiar with. I'm going to shrink this down, can delete these vertices, and just start modeling with this, with these vertices. It'll go like this, pull out a little bit more, extrude out to here, going to follow this angle like that. Maybe we'll even make this one go all the way out to here, yeah. Extrude that down, maybe go back in. Sure, yeah. And then extrude that back. I'm going to select all of these points and do the usual Control-Shift-B to smooth that all out. Now if we hit F3, convert to curve, we have our curve controls here, and I can turn the depth up, shade smooth, and now if I convert this back into a mesh, my mouth is a little far away from the microphone, we can use Control-R, use our usual regular mesh tools, Alt-E, extrude that out for the mount. Do the same thing down here. Yes! Okay, and now we can select that, Control-J, join, so it should be on all of them. That's a much more interesting design, I think. It might even be a little bit too... No, that's actually, you know what, that looks okay. And when you zoom out, that would probably work okay, but I've got these garbage bags I scanned once, and so let's try draping one of them on there too, as if it's kind of like a discarded plastic bag that they've already emptied. Let's see if I kind of go like that. I don't know if I'm buying it, but here we'll try dialing in the material a little bit more. We'll make it a little bit brighter. We'll make the color actually be correct. I have it draping off the edge here. Yeah, that works pretty good. And here, because right now all of these pieces are still made of pure trim. Let's what's the best way to do that? I think just inset a couple times, and then hit Alt-E, extrude faces along normals to kind of bring everything in, and I'm going to go back and reselect all of these edges right here, which is hard because everything's all blue now. But once we have that, we can Control-B, bevel, and it looks like we don't have corners, so I'm going to check, where's the corner? Intersection type, grid fill. Cool, okay. Now I can select these interfaces and give them back that base material. I think this little yellow thing is causing a little bit too much light down here, so I might block it with this piece of geometry here, just to darken this translucent bag. I love actually being able to work with like translucent, real-world type materials. Here, pull that in a little bit.
And I spent way too long adding these buildings into the background, which is basically like a bad audio remake of the tutorial I did last month. So watch that one if you're curious about how that works. Then I realized I was just starting to babble a little bit.
And now I'm realizing I'm just starting to babble a little bit, but I think the last thing I'm going to try to do for this video, I guess we can finish all the branding and stuff for this machine in a hopefully later video. Let's say I'll do that, although we all know I'm not the best at actually always following through on that. But here, let's try lining up this with the can here. This is another little piece that has that same footage on it. And in theory, if I turn on auto keyframing, I can kind of just have this move through here And with motion blur, it might just kind of work. Yeah, it'll work fine with motion blur. I don't know. I'm going to say this is good for today. This is just, this is most of what I spent February kind of doing, trying to build out these environments. But I will very much try to do another video very soon of turning this machine into something that actually looks like a proper kind of vending machine. I think we've got a good foundation here. I like this shape. I like this accessibility handle. We just have to add a bunch of signage, I guess. And I've got the quitting Adobe video coming out probably tomorrow, so that's good. Okay, and it's a new day. I ended up doing this shot last night too, using kind of all those same techniques. It was unexpectedly tricky just because having a proper color workflow really mattered for this one, just because it's all either in the shadows or bright and overexposed, so kind of dialing all of that in. I ended up turning off all the tone mapping and clamping and all of that, although I did have to clamp the saturation a little bit, just because the blue sky and the bag were just becoming oversaturated. I gotta figure out those gamut transforms or something. But yeah, I like this. I like shooting in actual locations. The thing is, what I love is the layers of water and the dripping and the stuff running through here and the barnacles and all of this rich texture, which is just really hard to find in this area. Basically, none of our buildings are all that old. And outside we have a lot of like Douglas firs and ferns and cedars. Actually, I was watching the new Avatar live action thing on Netflix, just because I'm always curious about how they go about that. And they film it in Vancouver, which is the same biome I live in, so it's like they're all just running around in my backyard. I want to make a video just talking about adaptations, because that stuff is so interesting to me. But yeah, this shot right here, I was able to pull a Luma key. I was able to track his hand right there. Here, I'll show you. Yeah, it's just coming up like that. This is what I was trying to do with the other shot. And yeah, you can see here, even with a low contrast look on it, it's hard to keep the whole dynamic range involved here. Like that. I think maybe the composition is a little bit too complex, but it's kind of fun. I did that same thing up here where I've got these cement guys kind of blending in with the top of this. I didn't really match up the texture all that well, but it still works because I have this other gradient blending in between the diffuse shader and just the transparent shader, so you can't really tell where one starts or ends. I also I should probably turn down their size a little bit. They look so small in the viewport, but then once you render them out, they look so blobby, but these little drips are so easy to add. You literally just have to model one little droplet. I'll take a cube like this, and then I'll bevel it, and I'll shade smooth, and I will give it a glass material with a refraction of, I think it's like 1.33, or is it 1.44? Oh, normally I know that, and turn down the roughness, and if you plug that into a particle system, just by default, it'll just fall like rain, assuming your scene's at scale. But we got our little guys in there. Oh, and I went harder than usual modeling all of these rocks here, which was as easy as just kind of duplicating the rock and moving it back until it fit the scale and was halfway intersecting through all of these markers here. But the reason I did that is because I did that same thing where I'm using an empty to control a gradient that's mixing between a darker and brighter version of the footage right here, because I wanted to kind of imply that this overhang is casting a shadow. And it's fun. The shadow actually feels as if it's kind of there in place a little bit. I'll probably use this technique more in the future. The one thing, so I want the gradient, or I want the shadow to be affecting the diffuse kind of ambient lighting on the rocks, but I still wanted to be able to keep some of these specular highlights and the reflections of the sky and the water, because the overhang wouldn't really be affecting the reflection. So to do that, we'll see if this makes sense. I have the footage going into a mix twice, but one of them is going through this RGB curve, so that darkens it, and the mix factor is this color ramp that's basically just a mask preserving those highlights. Here we can actually bring it up a little bit more, which means by the final thing, we darken everything, but we do keep those highlights unchanged, and that is what I'm blending with that whole gradient texture thing. Here's how the shot turned out. Yeah, I really like it. I think this proves the shot can work. Now I can just go through and add details and stuff like that. Again, I'll try to make another video where I'm up-resing all of this and actually adding all the details. I want little animated signage and stuff being like cash for cans on there. I also painted out the big log here. In theory, there aren't that many trees like in the world, and so just having all this driftwood floating around always feels a little bit weird. Even all these pilings and stuff, I was considering turning them into metal or something like that, but I'm like, I just like the texture too much. But yeah, I painted it out really easily using a technique I'll be talking about in the video I'm releasing probably tomorrow about leaving Adobe. And I also ended up doing that same trick with using the gradient to blend into a transparent shader down here to kind of help it blend into the ground. You can still kind of see it, like, you know, there's the CG and then there's the real one, but it's not a transition that would jump out at you if you're not looking for it. But the big thing I like, just to get kind of weird for a second, is just how this shot works in the edit. Like, every time there's an edit in a movie, the audience's brain is thrown out the window for a fraction of a second. Suddenly you've teleported. It's very unnatural. Your brain has to look at a completely new image out of nowhere and process what they're looking at, where they are as the audience, kind of what's happening. It's a very jarring thing that we've kind of learned how to kind of take in stride, but it's still a part of the viewing experience. And there's some edits that work, and there's some edits that don't work, and some that do when it feels like they shouldn't. And in this case, I think this moment works really well in the edit. Like, we go from this right here, which is, you know, overly textural, and it's all these kind of like uniform, dark, warm browns. The composition, you've kind of got this, you know, vanishing point off in the distance, interrupted by these cross things here with these notches. It's just, I like this composition, but I especially like how this all contrasts with this cut to this shot, where we've got these very clear blues and greens and yellows, and I definitely want to keep that, even as I keep adding detail. But also, like, the vanishing point, just straight in the middle of the image. The outer axes are just, you know, going straight across here, or vertical, which kind of compositionally means I can introduce these diagonals here and everything still feels really organized. I like how this matches this. In fact, I might, when I'm enhancing this machine, add a little bit like a notch or something to kind of just keep that line going, and like his orientation here. It cuts from they're down in the mud into like, hey, we're dumping out the cans in a way I think works really well. Also, I need to go in and randomize all these dead bugs. Oh my goodness. Actually, wait, no, this is kind of fun. So I modeled this shot, and I was modeling by hand this distant fairgrounds type thing out on a pier. And it was going okay. But my friend just went on a vacation, and he was actually staying near some fairgrounds that he happened to film as part of his vacation video, and so he was able to send me that shot, and I was able to just stabilize and linearize it in Resolve. And I dropped the footage into the scene, and I just had to model kind of some basic stuff to match the silhouette there. I could probably change these values a little bit. But yeah, I thought that was fun. And okay, now I'm done.